The latest generation of graphics cards have left many of us with a sour taste in the mouth. Whether it's disappointment with the performance, or the price, or the amount of VRAM, or all of the above, the RTX 40 and RX 7000 series GPUs haven't been the antidote we were looking for in the wake of the scalper pandemic, and the next gen ain't looking like it's going to be much to write home about either. In this world of increased prices and reduced performance expectations, of AI taking precedence over us lowly gamers, perhaps it's time to reject modernity and instead embrace the tradition of 3 years ago. Despite my intro, the RTX 3080 Ti was arguably part of the problem. The vanilla RTX 3080 was probably the last high-end GeForce that was generally liked, or at least not hated. It offered significantly better performance than the previous gen flagship for less money, which used to be how this thing worked. That card launched the wrong side of the perfect shitstorm of availability and demand I call the scalper pandemic, and when the 3080 Ti launched the following year with an MSRP of $1,200 US, it was in the wake of accusations that Nvidia was hiking prices to take advantage of the situation. A 70% increase in cost for 20% more VRAM and 12% more estimated performance seemed particularly egregious at the time. But that's all in the past. A lot of water has flowed under that burning bridge, and we're now in an era where we're being squeezed for everything. Maybe it's time to re-evaluate the 3080 Ti now that it's seen a radical drop in value on the used market. I picked up this EVGA FTW3 model on eBay for £500, about a third of the price you'd have paid for one shortly after launch, and I could probably have paid even less if I hadn't been so adamant that I wanted to get this particular model. EVGA already had a fine reputation as one of the best of the GeForce board partners, and it achieved nerd martyrdom by telling Papa Nvidia that they were done with their bullshit before quitting the GPU industry altogether. As you'd expect for a card that's only a generation old, or two depending on whether Blackwell's been released by the time you watch this, the 3080 Ti is still remarkably modern. Sure, 12GB of VRAM wasn't much for a high-end GPU at the time this card came out, and by 2023, VRAM was starting to become a real point of concern. But in the context of what you can get brand new for £500 in mid-2024, it's still depressingly relevant. Of course, it supports almost all of the RTX features, including ray reconstruction, but it doesn't support Nvidia's AI-powered frame generation tech. For that particular feature, RTX 40 is still the minimum requirement. However, we may still be too early in the development of this tech to know how much of a loss that really is. There is now competition for DLSS FG from AMD, and it's less fussy about which GPUs it works with. FSR frame generation is already making its way into a range of titles, and the games which only support DLSS FG can be modded to use this open source version anyway. Incompatibility with the official RTX frame gen might not be much more than a minor inconvenience. However, I'm not here to test frame generation today. I'm here to see how much raw performance the RTX 3080 Ti has in games from 2023 and 2024. To do so, I'm using my usual test rig, the moderately priced gaming PC. This features a Ryzen 5 7500F, which is potentially a bottleneck for this GPU at higher frame rates, so for that reason I'll be testing at a baseline of 1440p unless absolutely necessary. Hopefully, even a few years after its heyday, the 3080 Ti should still be overkill for 1080p. Considering how 2023 was the year that game devs decided they really wanted to punish PC owners, it's kinda nice to see that some of the bigger releases of 2024 so far are relatively relaxed on the system requirements. It helps that Horizon Forbidden West is a cross-gen title, originally designed to scale across both the current PS5 as well as the old PS4 series consoles. I tested completely maxed out at 1440p and saw an average of 83 FPS, with lows pretty much bang on 60. While the director's cut of Ghost of Tsushima is brand new on PC, it's originally a PS4 game, and its 8th gen origins are still apparent. Although the character models and art design and cutscenes are all top notch, the details are still a little short of what we'd expect in a 2024 release, which is probably why it runs like a dream on the 3080 Ti. Much of the time riding around Tsushima, the framerate is in the high 90s and low 100s. But I chose to benchmark a scene where I liberate a dojo, or tried to anyway. This is a little more complex, and so the average drops to 90 FPS with lows in the mid-70s. Although Helldivers II is very much a current-gen title, it also doesn't have any grand cinematic pretensions, beyond being an homage to Starship Troopers, which I did actually see at the cinema, but it always struck me as a movie that was most at home on VHS. Anyway, I digress. Helldivers 2 is a game that can be cranked up to the Ultra preset without upscaling, and still enjoy a 100 FPS average on the 3080 Ti. Dropping settings or turning on DLSS in order to hit 144 or 165 is obviously an option, if you have a pretty decent CPU to pair with it. Well, that's enough of the smooth, high frame rates for a while. Alan Wake 2 is Remedy's way of telling you to upgrade your graphics card, and even this previous gen monster can be humbled here. At 1440 high, the game can stay mostly above 60 FPS, with an average of 67. Enabling the RT high preset breaks out the path tracing, and that just isn't happening at 1440p without compromises. I found that DLSS balance doesn't look all that terrible and maintains a 30 plus experience with an average close to 40 FPS. Well, I've finally found it, a graphics card that can run Avatar Pandora tomorrow at ultra settings without upscaling. This game was one of the few over the last few years that defaults to turning upscaling on, and so far I've left it on in pretty much every test I've done. To be clear, it's still a benefit on the 3080 Ti. At 1440 Ultra without upscaling, the average only just passes 60 FPS, and lows are only just into the 50s, whereas the Ultra quality upscaling option keeps the minimum at approximately 60, while averaging 73. Anyway, I decided to celebrate the milestone by actually playing the game for once. Though I did so with DLSS quality, which averages 91 FPS in the benchmark, but in real gameplay I did see it drop into the 60s. Now, here's a tricky one. Starfield doesn't look CPU bound here. The GPU is pretty much running at 98% most of the time. The CPU is working hard, as we know it does in New Atlantis, but if I drop resolution or quality, the frame rate still goes up. And yet, at 1440 Ultra, the 3080 Ti scores 66.1 FPS with 1% lows of 52.5. I've tested two other relatively high-end cards recently, the RX 6900 XT and RX 7800 XT from AMD, and the spread between all three cards at the same settings is 0.2 frames on average and 1.1 frames at the 1% low end. Now, these three cards are similar in performance, but not this similar, so they're definitely acting like they're being limited by the CPU. Maybe I should look into this some more, if anyone still cares about Starfield, that is. A late addition to the hard-to-run category is Ninja Theory's new graphical spectacle, Hellblade II: Senua's Saga. Naturally, visuals like this don't come cheap, but the 3080 Ti isn't exactly an Atari 2600 either. There's probably not much of this game I can show on YouTube without risking demonetization, and there's not a lot of free roam gameplay, but this walk in the sunshine with your wounded prisoner is about as nice and tranquil as it gets, so it'll have to do. The game actually has a very handy preview system that lets you know how your PC will do, but I think it's a bit optimistic. At 1440 high, the preview suggests a frame rate in the mid-50s, but the average I counted in this walk was 47.7 with lows of 41, and cutscenes, of which there are a lot, can drop into the 30s. Naturally, DLSS helps, and the quality setting bumps the average up to nearly 66, though again, cutscenes do see things drop below the 50 mark. The RE4 Remake is a title I usually have to warn people about, as ignoring the VRAM warning in this one can cause a crash. With a 12GB frame buffer, the 3080 Ti can't run the max quality preset without triggering a red warning. On this occasion, however, I did actually ignore the warning and completed the test run without incident. To be on the safe side, you can still run RE4 at almost the same settings, and the only sacrifice you'll have to make is a drop to the 3GB texture setting. Either way, frame rates are basically unaffected, as the average FPS is 115 with lows of 96. As you are probably already aware by now, The Last of Us is a PC port which also uses a lot of VRAM. In fact, I'd say it probably single-handedly kickstarted the VRAM panic of early 2023. However, it's had some patches since then and isn't quite the hog it was last year. And yet, at the kind of quality settings the 3080 Ti is truly capable of, 12GB is very much borderline here. At 1440 with the ultra quality preset, we are still under that line however, and the average FPS is an excellent 83. Even better, the 1% lows are still over 60, coming in at 64 FPS. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is another PS5 game, and one that was specifically intended to capitalise on its PCIe SSD. I run all my games from a Gen 4 NVMe drive, but it's a WD770 and therefore not the fastest out there, which might go some way to explain why I get fairly low 1% scores. The average frame rate at 1440 very high is a whopping 107, but 1% lows fall a hair below the 60 mark. Enabling RT without upscaling is a bit of a stretch, unless you're happy with a 30 FPS experience. The average is close to 50 FPS, but lows only reach 27. Cyberpunk 2077 is old enough that it existed before the 3080 Ti was even released. However, it's also received constant updates over that time, including some that have further improved image quality at the expense of performance. Still, the Ampere card remains up to the challenge without needing to fall back on DLSS, as the average hits 82 FPS and lows are only a frame or so below the 60 mark. Enabling RT is a rabbit hole all of its own, and while path tracing isn't going to result in playable frames without heavy upscaling, the Ultra RT preset can manage 45 FPS at native 1440p. Rounding out the video with a few high frame rate results, starting with the legendarily smooth Forza Horizon 5. At 1440 you can actually max out the quality settings, including Extreme RT, and still see a 100 plus average frame rate in the benchmark test. However, the 1% lows do drop a little below the 100 mark, so compromising slightly at the Ultra preset is needed to help keep that triple digit FPS. For me, Fortnite is losing meaning as a benchmark test. In both DX12 and performance mode, it's stuttery as all hell for at least the first 2 matches after launching the game, and sometimes even more than that. I did eventually get a couple of relatively smooth games and saw an average at 1440 medium of 205 with lows of about 119. Maxing out settings isn't going to give a playable result unless you resort to DLSS, however. Fortnite is, after all, a UE5 tech demo at heart, and so it can look quite stunning at a sub 60 FPS average and with lows in the mid 40s. Finally, Call of Duty Warzone might not be my preferred battle royale, but it is the more enjoyable frame time experience right now. I can turn the quality up to 1440 Extreme, which is the highest preset available, and still enjoy a high frame rate. Without any form of upscaling, the average is an excellent 138, with 1% lows of 103. Just a shame I still absolutely suck ass. The performance data looks very good for the 3080 Ti. It certainly keeps up with modern games, and although it might not be an RT monster, with some DLSS, it's possible to get acceptable frame rates in even the heaviest path-traced games out there. I'm a bit worried about the 12GB frame buffer, but in truth, it didn't create much of an issue in my testing. If I tried to run games at 4K, it might be a different matter, but I'm not sure that 4K was ever on the cards here, at least not without upscaling. There is, however, something else that might give me pause before recommending the 3080 Ti in 2024. The eagle-eyed among you will have been looking at the power consumption numbers, and oh boy, they are flippin' huge. The card alone is pulling 400 plus watts, and the whole system can draw 560 while gaming. I don't have much positive to say about the RTX 40 series, and I'm not sure I'm going to review one anytime soon, but I dare say something like a 4070 Ti or Ti Super would utterly humiliate this GPU for efficiency. The RTX 3080 Ti is not an inexpensive card for me to be reviewing. My channel is primarily focused on older, cheaper cards, and £500 is a big investment for me, so expect to see it in a couple more videos before it goes back on eBay. My next planned video will see how it matches up against my personal GPU, the RX 6900 XT, and find out if I made a horrible mistake by not sticking with Team Green. In the meantime, thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.